joined. Okay. Right, good morning everybody. Good morning. It is 10 o'clock. We'll make a start. We have some apologies. Can I also note that we've got Councillor Ian Parry on screen. Can you hear us, Councillor Parry?
Yes, I can, Chair. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone.
And before we get into apologies, I'd like to welcome Councillor Nigel Evans, who's joining us for the first time, having replaced Charlotte Atkins. Councillor Yates. Sorry, Yates. Yes. We had that mistake, didn't we? The full council carried it on. Councillor Yates, sorry. Right, apologies.
I've received apologies from Councillors Perry, Thompson, Peters and Councillor Oates.
Other apologies? Not that we're looking for any more. Now we're going to declarations of interest, item 2. Are there any declarations of interest? Obviously we've all got interest in terms of the electoral review papers, but we'll come to that in a minute. If there are no declarations, we go to the minutes of the meeting held on the 17th of January. Are there any comments, amendments necessary? I think they're a true record. I'll sign that as such. Okay, so we're on to item 4, which is the integrated performance report for quarter 3 of the year 22-23. And we've got the report of the leader of council and cabinet member. Who's going to start?
I'll start off if I may, Mr. Chairman. I've got with me Wendy Thompson, who's the brains behind the operation. So any difficult or technical questions, I'll ask Mrs. Thompson to intervene. And also Ian Parry, who's on screen, joining us to talk about the financial components. Members, this report is a look back at our performance over the past few months. It's been to Cabinet last week, but this we feel, as you know, that we'd like to get a broader view on our performance and make sure that amongst members there's an understanding of which direction we're going in, how we're performing, and also making sure that we get your views as part of our monitoring process. Councillor Parry will be talking to the financial components and clearly we'll be drawing your attention to pressures around inflation, recruitment and retention, and talking about an overspend, an in-year overspend, which will require a move from reserves. There are a number of highlights in the report. I draw your attention to page 15, and also challenges that sit alongside. The format of the report has modified over the past couple of years, and you'll notice that it's particularly transparent and upfront in areas where we have risks and pressures, and also areas where we need to improve our performance. You cannot miss the red, which is children's services, the finance of children's services, but members will be aware that the reason for that is down to the numbers of children coming through and also the amount that we have to pay in order to look after them. So with that, Mr. Chairman, if I may hand over to Councillor Parry to talk about the numbers, if that's all right with you, and hand over to him now. Councillor Parry.
Apologies. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much indeed for asking us this morning. As you can see, the financial report does report a projected overspend of some 16 million, reduced to about 11 million after we've taken out the reserve that we'd already planned to spend there. But as the leader has already said, we have been facing a number of challenges this year, not least, of course, inflation, which was there at the beginning of last year and has grown during the year. Cost of energy, an increase in payroll that we hadn't anticipated or budgeted for at that time, which we've also planned, Cabinet has approved, taking out an additional 5 million from contingency to cover that. But it still leaves us with a gap. And the reason we've got a gap is because we've not chased down that number of children in care that continues to rise and continues to be quite an expense. And that is because more children come into care, more children with more complex needs, and this requires resourcing. This requires specialist staff, difficult to recruit. We've now put extra cash into that to allow the department to get ahead of that issue, to recruit the people that we need to be able to focus and bear down on those issues about how we support families and how we manage positive transition from care back into family life if we can. That's the target. But if you look in one of the appendices, I can't remember which one it was, Joe. I was just quite quickly trying to find it. But you see the budget plan that we had for this actually was based on a reduction in the number of children over time, over a 2-year period. And you can see the trajectory, the actual increase is opened up quite a gap between what we'd budgeted and expected to what's actually happened. And that gap reveals the financial pressure, the financial gap that we've now got, the 16 million reduced to 11 million when we funded it. So that forecast is likely to stay as that forecast is at the end of the financial year. We'll have to, as the leaders already said, draw on reserves to get us through that. And the fact that we've made the investment, I think, will start to show positive benefits in the early stages of this financial year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman. Good morning. It is that last point that Councillor Parry made that concerns me probably the most in this report, because the red in the report is clearly on children's services, the amber and red, both financial as well as ongoing performance. And I think if we were to take the last 5 years and just put a tracker and say, let's see how much money has gone into children's services. I remember, and I alluded to this at the last meeting, looking at the quarterly figures. I remember putting in a big dollop of extra money into children's services to get transformation, which was then going to deliver 2 or 3 years ago a significantly lower cost and a step change in transformation. I accept the transformation's gone, but I also accept we've put in significant amounts of money. And I just worry that we're a hostage to fortune in terms of what's going to happen next. And I wonder what the plan is to address, some of the complex needs that post-COVID we're bound to be seeing, or are we just going to keep putting more and more money in to try and get the transformation in children's services we see? I just feel I'm a bit... It feels like we're reacting rather than necessarily have a very clear plan to try and get numbers down significantly over time. It feels like our original plan failed, and I can't see clearly what the current plan is when we keep looking backwards.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Councillor Pert, for that really, really positive and very fair challenge. I think you're absolutely right. You are where we were some months ago, before we, I think, had the interim director of children's services, who has, for us, taken on board our concerns, which are exactly the same as your concerns, Councillor Pert, which was, what are we looking at here? Are we looking at something which is not going to get better, no matter how much money we put into it, or is this a solvable problem? And the analysis that subsequently came out of that challenge from the Cabinet was, I think, the best analysis that we've ever had on how this issue behaves and how you need to address it. And the strategy itself, is the strategy coherent? Will it deliver? Is there evidence that it will deliver? And the Cabinet is now totally convinced that the strategy we have is deliverable. The gap we had in that strategy was the resourcing plan for the specialist staff to be able to make it happen. It isn't just a question of throwing money at it. It isn't just a question of waiting for things to turn around. It is actually front-end specialist intervention and planning and tracking and working with families, making sure those educational needs are met appropriately, and making sure that we work closely with families to prevent escalation of need, etc. So all of that, we are confident is now in place and confident that this will deliver. I also have to say, Chair, there is a bit of a backstory to this in that we were slow and slower than we anticipated and budgeted for in terms of the starting position on this. The get-go line was delayed quite a lot through various reasons and the explanations around negotiation with our unions, for example, delayed the whole thing by about a year, which we reckon probably cost us a couple of £1 million at least in terms of the delay in being able to get on top of this issue. So the backstory doesn't help. The fact that we feel we didn't have a good handle, which is exactly what Councillor Pert's challenge is based on. But I can assure committee that Cabinet believe that we have addressed this and we have got ahead of this and we are investing in the right resources, in the right place, and we've got the right plan in front of us.
Back.
Councillor Pert, yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Barry, for those words. I mean, we can all see from the trends that it continues to go in the wrong direction, and you may say, well, that's too early to start seeing the impact of the additional resources and the additional people coming on board. And that would be a fair comment, if that was what you're going to say. It would be probably useful just to see more of the plan so that we've got the ability to have the same insight that the Cabinet have got, first of all. Second of all, I would be interested in having an understanding of the future assessment of demand, because I think with children's services, the problems that families have been living through over the last couple of years have made definitely things more complex, but equally some of that complexity isn't coming to the fore until much later on. And finally, it'd be useful to see a forecast, because it's very difficult to hold the Cabinet to account when there is no forecast as to where you'll be in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, or however long it will take just to see the trend line beginning to uptick.
Yeah, again, a very fair challenge, Chair, and thanks for the question. And I think you're absolutely right. I'm the wrong Cabinet member to have in front of you to get into that level of detail. So I think you could do with the Cabinet member and the Director to be able to drill down on those specific issues. But I think, you know, what I can say is, let's bear in mind that we're not talking about a struggling children's services at all. We're talking about a specific problem here, specific pressure that every council in the land has got. And we seem to have a target that we've set to address this. But we're not talking about we've got a problem with our children's services. We've got a problem with children coming into the care system and requiring support, and that's expensive. So our children's services are, by inspection, one of the few services in the country. You know, around 3% of services have the same sort of status of our children's services department, and through inspection is a good, well-performing department. So we shouldn't this morning consider that we've got a problem with our children's services at all. We haven't. We've got an issue here about children coming to the system, and how do we manage that better, and how do we help those children to transition back out of the system, or to prevent more children coming to the care systems in the first place.
Okay, Councillor White has indicated.
Thank you. I just wanted to talk to Councillor Pert's points. The original transformation structure was, on analysis, a bit light. So, for example, there was each district had a district lead. There was no deputy district lead, and that left the person who was in charge very isolated and with a caseload. So we decided to invest in deputy district leads to improve the functioning of those districts too, because if they don't function properly, then children are going to come into the system, and the early help proposition is less easy to deliver if people are submerged with work. Further, there was an insufficient number of educational psychologists, muddle up thank you, psychologists or psychiatrists, better known as Councillor Francis pointed out, ed psychs. That's the easiest way to pronounce it. So we've decided to, as part of that additional funding, recruit another 10 ed psychs, that's not a bloke, to make sure that we are delivering for children on the front line, and and preventing them coming into the system where they start to charge, where they start to cost a lot of money. We do need to be mindful of the number of unaccompanied asylum-seeking children that we have in the system. We're currently, as at Wednesday of last week, we had 99. That's a cost on us. And also the backlog in the court system is another area where we find ourselves struggling to get people through. Councillor Francis will be acutely aware of that with his job as chairman of which school? He said it with his... and also the other component is the work we're doing with partners. And by partners, that's just code for the NHS. We do have children coming into the system which are costing a seven-figure sum per year. That some of those costs need to fall where they lie, and that is with the healthcare needs of the children who we are looking after in those cases, because they've got profound healthcare needs. They're requiring an awful lot of looking after in secure accommodation, and who pays for that is something that the interim director is becoming very, very adept at dealing with, making sure that the people who should be paying for it are paying for it. So I just wanted to give a bit more colour to the question that you asked. Those are part of the reasons why we find ourselves in a situation of being overspent as we are. The design of the original transformation scheme was a little light. We have remedied that. That does require an investment of an additional, I think, £5.7 million. We've done that, and I hope to see the dial moving in the other direction. However, Councillor Perry makes a really, really important point. Where children need to come into care, they will come into care. And this authority will have to bear the cost of that. What we are trying to do through the transformation programme is ensure that fewer children are coming into care, because the early intervention process that we're putting in place is bearing fruit, but it's taking a bit more time than we would have hoped. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
There's 4 indications, and I'll take them in order. Councillor Francis, Spencer, Worthington and Yates now. So, Councillor Francis.
Thank you, Chairman. Morning, Chairman. Morning.
Good morning.
Children and Families Dashboard, page 30. And I take the point that the leader of the council has just made about children coming into care. One of the things that I was deeply involved with about 6 years ago, 5-6 years ago, was the prevention of children coming into care. It is a very difficult situation. It's onerous on us because we can't predict how many children are coming into care. We can't predict how many unaccompanied asylum seekers we'll have. And as chair of Marston Special School, our planned places 10 years ago was 42. It went up to 62. It's now 100, and we're 28 overscribed. So we've gone to 128. If you look at page 30 in the dashboard, Ed Sykes, educational psychologists, are the key to the EHCPs. We've fallen behind on EHCPs. We have serious issues with the EHCPs. And you can't get these psychologists off the shelf. They're not in the stores waiting on it in a bin to be taken off the shelf, put into the system to do the job. So you can't do it like that. It's a training issue, and there's not enough people out there to do the job. So I don't see how we're going to get on top of that in the short term. It's a very difficult situation. And when you look at the graph, interactive tool, it's quite frightening actually, because we're sliding off the bottom of the blooming slide. You know, the red line. It's going to be very difficult. And I take your point, Ian, on the unions. That was 2 years. 2 years of prevarication that we had to go through. And we put 8.1 million into the system, or 8.2 million into the system to help it out. And I've never ever seen a full return on that investment. I don't know where we went with it or how it was actually allocated or used. And we've put a further 5.7 million, I believe, into the system now. So, you know, all in all, you're talking about nearly 14 million quid we've put in over the last 5-6 years. I would seriously like to see the return on that investment, Ian. And to say we're going to get Ed Sykes to reduce this problem on the interactive tool, I don't think we can solve that in a minimum of 2 years, perhaps even 4. What's your thoughts on that? And where's the money coming from to do it?
Thank you. The Cabinet have, in fact, approved further support for children's services in order to address this issue. I have to say, it's not really an investment. It's an issue that we've got that we need to address, and it's going to cost some money to transition what we have at the moment into something which we believe will work better. And that's taken some time to do, as the leader's been describing in more detail, get to the analysis and understand the issue and what really is at the kernel of this problem that we need to solve. We've invested in it. We've allowed it sufficient time, sufficient road to run on. Hasn't worked or hasn't worked sufficiently well. The numbers still increase, and as you rightly say, the gap is opening up so much that this is costing us a lot of money. So we're confident now that the investment that's been approved by Cabinet and the revised strategy by the interim chief executive will get us to where we need to get to. How long that will take is difficult to assess at this point, but I think we can expect to see changes and impact within the first few months at least. We start to see now evidence that children coming into the system is slowing or flatlining a little bit, but these things have a habit of then ticking up again. An incident happens and risk levels reduce and more children come to the system, or as the leader's already said, a difference in the profile of asylum-seeking children coming to the county. So there are things which are unpredictable, but if things are steady state, the investments we made, we think will return positive later in the year.
Councillor White wants to come in. Can I take Councillor White and then have you... Okay, yeah. Councillor Francis then?
Yeah, coming back on that, Ian, I appreciate what you're saying, and I agree with most of what you say, because it is a serious issue, and we have got tremendous pressures coming down the line from particularly children in care, if you like. But we've tried to address this issue, as I've said before, year after year after year. And in my view, we've not moved forward at all in the last 6 years, which is it's simply not good enough. And I would like to see, and I take Jeremy Pert's point here, I think he was spot on. I would like to see the Cabinet report and to see exactly where we are with this, because I don't think we've got the information to make the assessment that we need to actually move in on this. So I appreciate it, and it's a very difficult situation. There's some serious financial pressures there. But we're putting money into the system, and I haven't seen enough results coming out as yet. And I appreciate that it's a very difficult scenario, particularly the thing that upsets me more than anything is we've just moved into Tillington. Tillington School, we've taken 4 classrooms for special educational needs. But the rest of the school is going into an academy. How the hell are we going to work that one and square that circle? I don't know. So, we've got all these schools that are going into academy status, and we've got no control over it. That's another thing that worries me. The issue of control over the money we're investing, which goes into normal schools as well, is a serious concern, because they can do what the heck they want, to be quite frank, once they've become an academy status. So there's some major issues here, and the Cabinet Member for Education has got to get to grips with some of this, because I've not seen any results yet.
Chair, forgive me, it's not my place to say what the committee should be looking at, but I would have thought Councillor Pert's committee or another committee would be looking in more detail, because there is a lot of detail into this strategy, which would be useful for Scrutiny to understand and offer a view on. I'm here to talk about the financial impact of all of this and what we're doing about it in terms of our budget. So I think we're in a reasonable place. Clearly, there are areas around children's services which are very challenging indeed, and Councillor Francis has already pointed out a couple of those issues. SEND, transport, children coming to the care system, complex needs are all areas which are, for every council, a big challenging issue. That's the thing we do most of in this council. We care for people. and children are obviously key in that. So it isn't as though we have a choice in any of this. We have to look after children as they come in our direction, but we have to find ways of doing that more efficiently and trying to help those children and those families to stay out of the care system as much as we possibly can. That's the best place for them, and it's obviously the most economical place for the public purse.
I'll bring in Councillor White. I'll just point out that twice now we've got two members asking for more insight or data in how the Cabinet is making its assessment on its strategies.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. And I think it would fall to Councillor Spencer's committee, more than likely, to, that you're off the hook there, Councillor Pert, to take a look at this. And we can undertake to get the information that Councillor Spencer would deem necessary to allow him to have a further view. Just a couple of observations about Councillor Francis's words. Councillor Francis and I became county councillors at the same time when we had around 650 children in care, and we've got over 1,400 now. It's worth reminding ourselves of the circumstances that have changed over those years. And those circumstances include the Baby P case, some pretty awful cases of neglect involving a lack of oversight on the part of social services departments, Solihull, for example, and others, which means that we need to make sure that our children's services are able to take on board those children who need our help. I don't necessarily accept the phrase of not seeing a return on investment. The investment that we put into children's services, if we do it correctly, first of all, will reduce the number of children coming into the service, and secondly, it's an investment in the children themselves. And if we're able to, despite the fact these children have had very, very traumatic upbringings, that's the reason why they're in care. If we can create happy, balanced adults as a consequence of their time in care, I think that is a good return on investment. But the other part about it is there's no prospect of ever having a control group, as you might say in science. We can't have a group of children in Staffordshire who we do nothing to with the early intervention, early help and taking them into care, and a group of children who we do, and then see whether or not the transformation works. We have to use our experience and our knowledge to determine whether or not the investment that we're putting in does create the healthy, balanced adults that we're hoping for. You talk well about the education and healthcare plans and relating it to academies. Those two things are, in my view, interlinked. And I think that the rise that we see in EHCPs is possibly a function of the number of academies that we're seeing as well. I have no evidence to back that up. It's conjecture on my part, I hasten to add. But it is getting to the point where, if we're not careful, every child in Staffordshire will have an EHCP. And it is getting slightly barking, really. There does need to be reform to the way that Ofsted works, so that chief executives, they used to be known as head teachers of academies, make sure that they're including the children in their academies who perhaps are struggling without reverting to an EHCP by default. And one might wonder why that default is sought so frequently. That then puts pressure on our high needs block. The allocation of £400 million by the government recently to help with the high needs blocks around England was welcome, but insufficient to cover the gaps that upper-tier local authorities find. For example, the figures I had for Kent, their high needs block was £120 million overspent, rising to £200 million. Government allocates £400 million, so you can see that one authority can get through almost all of it in a single, well, half of it in a single sitting, Mr. Chairman. So you raised some important points. I hope I've been able to at least deal with some of them. But the additional funding that we're putting into the children's services, and indeed working with the Schools Forum to secure the money we need for the high needs block, I think will bear fruit in due course. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I bring in Councillor Bob Spencer.
Chair, thank you for that. I was going to make some of the points that have previously been made, but I won't go over that. Just by way, just to start off with, about some reassurance, covering those issues about where the data is, to provide some reassurance that these initiatives are working or we're moving in the right direction. My committee had the interim report only a couple of weeks ago, And one of the main concerns that the committee expressed was precisely the fact that we're now 2 years in, and despite all of the additional funding, we don't seem to have any definitive measurement about the efficacy of the plans or where we're going with this particular strategy. And what was concerning was that some of the descriptions of where we were, and I use an example, we were told that the management information processes were clunky. That was the expression used by the service. Didn't give a great deal of reassurance that we were able to make some important decisions. And as Councillor Parry pointed out, this is a large amount of money. If it continues to go on the same trajectory, are we able, I mean, does it become unsustainable? And also the point that was made about everyone will soon be on one of these plans was also echoed. The good news is that we had a reassurance that we were going to go away and look at means of some sort of milestone measurement around the effectiveness of this. And I have to say, reading through the report, and I'm going to sound like a scratch record because I made the same point last time, we can't just keep relying on badly drawn straight line graphs here. We have already identified that there's an issue. We need to understand that more. And the final point that I would make is that we won't solve this problem. It isn't just a one issue problem. We've already heard that it's about staff and it's about how some of these things are done. It's a multifaceted approach. And I think that that adds to the argument that we need a better means of measurement and assessment of where these processes are, because we need to find out where the blockages are, where the obstacles are for us to move forward. And it is a little disappointing that we don't have that definitive measurement at the moment. But actually, to finish on a positive, if we've heard that there is now a collective confidence in the strategy and how we're going to move forward, then I think we also should have some confidence that we are able to better measure or suggest some better measurement than perhaps we've used in the past. Because aside from that measurement, the overall descriptions that my committee heard were all very positive. People working very hard to make better lives for those individuals, usually young people who find themselves in these terrible positions. So we are working hard, officers are doing that. It's just that we all, and I think we've heard it expressed this morning, we all have that concern that we need to see some success and we need a proper measurement and perhaps not what we've seen in this report. Thank you.
Have left the call now.
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think Councillor Spencer's articulated his requests and his requirements, and it would be through his committee that those will be dealt with.
Okay. Councillor Worthington next.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Ian. I think is he still with us? Oh, right. Well, basically, Mr. Chairman, obviously these EHCP plans, we had Dr. Hallett came to my committee of audit and gave us the actual numbers. I think it would be important and for all members to get the numbers, saying that they're within 20 weeks of being issued as low, remaining low, isn't good enough. I've got an incident in the Staffordshire Moors where one EHCP is actually 4 years out of date. Now, the school are blaming the county council, so I'm trying to get to the bottom of this because if that's correct, it's not acceptable. But I do feel that I think we need to know these numbers. I think the last count I got from Dr. Hallett was about 256, something from like over 100. So it's more than double then. And I think he's on the increase. So I think we need to know what's going on. It's like Councillor White says, the way we're going, every child will be having an EHCP, which is not the way forward for this county. So just concerned, I think the members need to know these numbers, not just percentage, saying we are 38%, the national average is 58% isn't good enough. We need to know the figures. Thank you.
Councillor Wide?
Thank you. I was being flippant when I said every child in the county will have EHCPs. They surely won't, that's for sure. But they are rising steadily, and it is a concern that they're being used as the default option. I have to say that if there is somebody who's been waiting, if there's a child that's been waiting for 4 years, I need to know who that child is and where they are, because that's completely unacceptable, and that would be the worst I've ever heard of. The waiting times are higher than we would like, but I've never heard of one of 4 years. I've heard one of 20 weeks plus on several occasions, but certainly not 4 years. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Nigel Yates.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And just let me start by just apologising if I'm going over ground from previous meetings, because obviously I'm new to this committee, but I'm trying to have a catch-up. Looking at the graph on page 41, that looks like a situation which is obviously out of control, and I think listening to the conversations we've had around, then that's it. I'd like to have seen, you know, previous years, so to speak, just to give an indication that in previous financial year and scenarios, the business case, I hate the word business when you're talking about little human beings who are going to hopefully develop into adults who contribute, you know, wholly to society, so it's a horrible word to use. I'd like to sort of see if the rationale in previous years has actually matched that. And I'd also be interested in sort of seeing if there's any kind of divergence when we, you know, started with the lockdowns and the COVID crisis, because that put a lot of pressure onto family units, and also the cost of living crisis, which is added to the pressures which COVID put on with the cost of living crisis, because that, you know, obviously builds up and causes a crescendo of issues, so to speak. Very pleased to pick up and hear about the efforts on the transformation policies in the early intervention, because it is about getting in there early, and within that you do need the appropriate and, you know, additional levels of staffing to do that. I read a number of comments through this report where, you know, recruitment and retention comes up as a potential key, and I'm sure there's efforts being done on that basis. But if it's at all possible to signpost me to some historical data on the kind of employment levels which we have in the different areas, and see where the trajectory is going. And just one point, again, picking up on the leaders' report from earlier on, when it comes to recruitment and retention and training, there is a comment regarding apprenticeships in the wider Staffordshire workforce community. Is there an emphasis on providing apprenticeships in this area, in child services and social care, and also being mindful, as we discussed at Staffordshire Moorlands, the introduction of T-levels is taken over from BTECs, which has got a lot more emphasis on the work placement part of that particular study. And I think that's something, if we aren't already on top of as a county council, that's something which I think we should be engaging with the local universities, so that we become a core provider of that coursework going forward.
Councillor White, is that context available from somebody?
Can I suggest for Councillor Yates a bit of an archaeological dig through some of the papers over the preceding years? The search function is quite powerful. You can just look at the reports over many years to highlight to draw into the areas where we've been working through children's services. You're correct on the graph in paragraph 96. The business case and the budget was drawn up probably 2 or 3 years ago, and that's reflected in the graph that you got in front of you. But you're quite right to reflect on the fact that COVID and the cost of living does put pressure on families. As families encounter more strain, then the strain in the house becomes more difficult to manage, and sometimes the children are casualties of that and end up being in care. We couldn't have anticipated that, I don't think. I defy anybody to be sitting here in 2019 or early 2020. Was it 2020? It was, yeah. To say, actually, things are going to take a huge downturn over the next couple of years, and that's going to blow a lot of our predictions out of the water. But you are correct that COVID and cost of living will inevitably be weighing down on this particular area. You referred to employment levels. We do indeed have young people who are coming into children's social services, starting to learn to be social workers through, I think it's an apprenticeship scheme. I went to visit the Lichfield Children's District Hub by the police station in Lichfield about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and met, I can say this now because I'm in my mid-50s, a young person who had just recently graduated from university and was learning how to be a children's social worker, had a very light caseload, was being very carefully supervised, and was starting to learn how to become a social worker in that area. We believe that growing our own is something that develops loyalty. You'll see this in the people strategy, which is the next agenda item. Growing our own and encouraging people to be loyal to the organisation and getting people in young is a really good way of solving some of our recruitment issues, and that's indeed what we are pursuing, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Yates, did you want to come back on that?
Yes, if I don't mind, just coming back on the COVID and cost of living thing and how that skews. With only having that very short timescale graph, he doesn't look at the history and he doesn't sort of see if you can actually look at where peaks started to happen. I mean, that's the actual line is a slightly wobbly line going upwards, but, you know, is there an assessment of a little bit of peaking, a little bit of rippling, so that, because it's a bit like a snowball falling down a hill, something starts something and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger till eventually it dissipates at the bottom. And there is always that time lag in all these things, but it's been able to, you know, put the intelligence into to predict how that is moving. So it would have been interesting to see if there was a sort of bulge and then drop down, so to speak, you know, and whether that could have been, in hindsight's a wonderful thing, but that's all we've got sometimes to learn from, how we could sort of foresee that and say next time let's factor that into the algorithm, so to speak, to see if we can churn out better figures. And just one thing I didn't mention, you mentioned the fact that there's 99 unaccompanied asylum seekers now. Do we get central government funding specifically for that, or is that something which the burden has put onto the county? So in that respect, it's almost an irrelevant comment, but I take on board the pressure he puts on the workforce who are looking after those.
Mr. Chairman, we do get funding from central government. I don't think it's adequate to cover. It's only a relatively trivial amount of money, isn't it? Do you know how much? Yeah. So it's insufficient. So we have to cover the gap. So it does make a material difference to our finances. I'll just refer you back to the answer I gave to Councillor Francis. If you draw a line from the one that you can see on paragraph 96 backwards to May 2009, that number would have been 650, and there's been a steady increase in the number of children coming into care since then. The purpose of the transformation, which we started thinking about 4 years ago, was to say, actually, if we don't do something, then it's going to continue onwards and upwards, potentially in perpetuity. So what can we do to change things in order to, will you grant me some leeway, Mr. Chairman, just mindful of the fact that Councillor Yates is new. If we don't do something to change it, it's going to continue upwards. So what can we do to change the circumstances? The answer to that was improve the early intervention at a district level to prevent children coming into the care system, working with families at a very early stage when things started to go wrong. And the promise of that transformation was that the line that you see there, the blue line, would be the net result by now of the transformation work. There's a couple of things, well, several things intervened. COVID, cost of living is having an impact. The transformation, as I was giving you an answer I gave to Councillor Pert earlier, was perhaps a bit light in certain areas, which didn't allow sufficient resources to be put into the front line. And the other one, the fourth one. Yeah, and making sure we had sufficient educational ed psychs. I'm going to stick with that now. So we've changed that now. We've invested further money into it so that the actual line will start to tip over. Now, Councillor Spencer made the point. He wants to see more data to substantiate that hope that we have that it will peak and start to fall. That will be provided and scrutinised through his committee, and I hope that we'll be able to not just provide evidence that we've thought it through very carefully, but also that the change is coming because we want the change to come and we don't want more children in care. So a fulsome answer, Mr Chairman, but mindful of the fact that Councillor Yates is new to the committee.
Councillor Spencer is indicated again.
Chair, thank you. Just very quickly, and I don't want to stifle debate, but I think most of the debate has been about this lack of data, understanding of the process. Just by way of reassurance, my committee has already previously recognised this. There is work underway, and I just wondered if I could provide some more reassurance to this committee that I or my committee will bring some proposals forward in the future about how we best look at these things. I think including that bit about longitudinal variance that we've just heard there about how things change over time. There are some very simple means of achieving that. We've already had those conversations. And like I say, rather than just keep rehearsing the issues, maybe if members would be reassured that my committee would look at that and will bring some positive suggestions, proposals forward. Thank you.
Okay. No other indications. Can I ask something about adult social... Oh, sorry, Councillor Francis, yes.
Yeah, just briefly, there's a pebble in the pond with all of this, and I take Bob's point. I mean, when it was my committee, we looked at this for 10 years. 10 years we looked at this, year after year after year. Things didn't improve, some bits improved, some bits didn't improve. We put more money in, and as I've reiterated earlier on, alluded to, the amount of money we put in, I don't think we've had the value for it, but that's another issue. One pebble in the pond in all of this is, as I alluded to earlier, the academy status of schools. Now, if you've got a child with special education needs and disabilities, a SEND child, which we have at Marshlands, we want some of those children who are PMLD or not really difficult to go into mainstream education. Mainstream education has got to be spot on with SEND children. They've got to have a proper Senko in each school, absolutely dedicated to do the job. That will help us out, and it will help us out money-wise, because the economies will take the problem on. We can't force that issue, and I don't know how it's going to be resolved, because it's a catch-22 where you've got an academy, the head teacher makes the decision. If he said, I'm not having a full-time teacher as a Senko, we can't do anything about it. So we're in a really serious catch-22 situation with that, and I would like to see how we're going to resolve it.
Okay, I'll bring in Councillor Clements.
Thank you, Chair. I think I must have put the wrong perfume on this morning, as there's a massive gap between me and the next person. Well, something like that, John. Obviously, I think everyone's mentioned about the recruitment and retention of staff for social care, and it'd be interesting to see where those apprenticeships are. You did mention those earlier, Councillor White, and T-levels and work placements, because on-job training in young people is great, because they get to see a bit of everything and decide which channel they want to go. I have major concerns about all these EHC plans, and why there's an increase, and I'm wording this very, very carefully, because I was pulled up about what I said before. I think this is my personal opinion. Do we have just demands that are being placed on schools? My child needs an EHC plan, and there is no reasoning behind that. It's because there may be a problem, but it's not been identified. I'm wording that very carefully, Councillor White. Again, it'd be no surprise for me to raise the transport costs. What are we doing? We have a green thread going through everything we do here at County. So what are we doing to have more local pickups to local schools, rather than travelling the length and breadth of huge areas to get our children to school? And again, as as Councillor Spencer has said, we need the data to back up some of what we're seeing today. I welcome this report. It's a Q3 report, and thank the Cabinet and the Finance team for making it a little bit more understanding. I don't like the graphs. I really struggle to try and understand some of the graphs we've got in this report. That could be just me, but as Councillor Spencer raised it as well, I don't feel so bad. And the last one for me is about digital infrastructure, the challenges we've got to get to those really hard to reach rural areas that we've still not managed to identify that need some broadband intervention. And obviously that comes under my role as Prosperous Chairman. And we've still not got to that nitty-gritty of how we get to that last 3%. Thank you, Chair.
Did you want to come back on this?
Thank you for raising the point about apprenticeships. Sarah's at the back. I think she heard you make that point, so we'll get that information to you. I'm a big fan of apprenticeships. Number 2, son just finished his engineering apprenticeship at IMI Engineering in Fradley after 4 years of effort, and he's now a qualified engineer, which I think is tremendous. My niece is doing an apprenticeship, ready for it, in dry stone walling. She lives in Yorkshire with my sister. She will never be out of work for as long as she lives, but she can strike matches with her hands. Amazing. It's a rough old game, is dry stone walling. But I am a huge fan of apprenticeships because university is not necessarily the right way to go for many, many young people. And I would really implore anybody who's leaving school to think not just about university as an option, but also as an apprenticeship. It does you a great deal of good. Obviously, there are exceptions, Councillor Francis, and to the point about EHCPs, yeah, we could talk about EHCPs all morning. The transport costs, send transport is an issue that we are looking at the moment. The expense of transporting children around the county and out of county on a daily basis is huge. And we need to think about how we can do that in a more rational way. The portfolio holder for education is looking at that, and I'm sure it will come to, yet again, Councillor Spencer's committee in due course. It might come to your committee, in fact, either or. The digital infrastructure is a challenge. That last 3% is something we've been working on for a number of years now. If you live in parts of the moorlands or indeed parts of the more rural areas of the county, it is difficult to get a signal. And short of investing in carrier pigeons, I'm not quite sure how we're going to solve that. We need the telecoms providers to step up. There has been investment. There's a digital fund that the government's had available that we've been tapping into over the course of the past few years, but it does need to improve so that everybody has equality of access to digital infrastructure. All we can do is keep lobbying and keep pushing on those two. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Come back, Councillor Clements.
All I'll say is on the last point, speak to Elon Musk about Starlink.
Right. I'm just going to bring us into a different subject, and that's adult social care, because there's a number of comments throughout the report, not necessarily consistent. I just wanted to raise a few issues about where we are with adult social care. For instance, on page 13 of the report, which is page 15 of the PDF, there's a throwaway line said, recent reduction in demand for adult social care, which I wasn't aware of any background to it. Then page 16 of the PDF, we've got adult social care reforms are delayed to 2025. Page 17 of the report, timeliness in sourcing brokerage for adult social care has improved. And I just wondered where we are in terms of the overall provision, because we were talking about getting our own Stafford County Council run premises, care premises. And then lastly, referring to digital, page 18 of the PDF, we're spending 615,000 on digital social care records. So I'm wondering how they're helping. I know they're all different things, but they're all sort of part of the adult social care provision. I just wonder if there's any overall themes that you can pick out from those.
Mr. Chairman, you have caught me slightly on the hop because the transparency of the report is that I tend to go to the areas where it's red and focus in great detail on the red areas. So my knowledge of children's services is I'd say, pretty good at the moment. Areas that are green are areas that I spend less time on, and we tend to, in general, because we take a risk-based approach, we tend to spend less time on it. I can't speak to the answers. I can't speak to the points about the reduction in the demand of adult social services. I can tell you that the number of people awaiting discharge from hospitals in Staffordshire, because I've phoned all the chief executives and the chairs of each of the trusts that serve us, is that our performance is outstanding. There is usually 0 or 1 maybe awaiting discharge. The rest of them are discharges, delayed discharges for other reasons. The delay of the uncertainty that was caused around the changes to the adult social care system did cause us some fairly significant collywobbles because the costs of those would have been astronomical, and the amount of money that was proposed to put forward to cover those costs would have been insufficient. So the delay till 2025 works in our favour in terms of our management of the adult social care portfolio. But in terms of the rest of the questions, Mr Chairman, I'm afraid I can't give you a meaningful answer at this point. I'll have to come back to you in due course. Can you,
He also raised a question about some of the figures on Ukrainians. It's page 19 of the report, page 21 of the PDF. There's a reference to 460 residencies and 2,000 Ukrainians, which implies that there's an average of over 4. I'm wondering if there's any multi-inhabitant residences that we've got that make the stat make sense, or is the stat wrong?
it doesn't make sense the way you've read it, Mr Chairman. Is it paragraph, please?
I think it's paragraph 26, but it's page 19 of the report.
So the way I read this is the 460 Staffordshire residents, with the offers that they've made, makes available 2,000 slots, and of those 860 are occupied.
But that would imply there's 4 Ukrainians per resident, which doesn't seem to make sense to me.
No, so it would be 2 Ukrainians per resident, but if you look at the way I'm reading it is that of the 460, and this is generalising obviously, then each of those residents is offering an average of just over 4 places in their home.
I can't believe that's the case.
I can't.
The average is 4.
I'll have to come back and clarify for you. But
Councillor Yates?
Some people have got spare homes that they're
Maybe
letting out completely.
It seems high. Councillor Yates?
Yeah, just backing up Councillor Wright over there, is the, 460, to me, 460 came forward, which gave a capacity of 2,000 spaces. However, only 860 of those spaces were taken up. So it doesn't actually mean I was 4.2. What it doesn't say is how those 860 were spread over the 460. Is it 2 per people or with some bigger households? I think that was the first statement is an expression of capacity. The second statement is an expression of the usage of that capacity, isn't it? So it's a little bit mixed up in how it's done, but I think it doesn't infer that there's large numbers per household, so to speak.
Councillor Heath?
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say that in the Moorlands there are quite a few families that have small holiday cottages, holiday lets, and some of the residents in my division have turned over holiday cottage so they can accommodate perhaps someone with more children and more numbers, which might stretch the figures a little bit.
Yes, I think that's exactly what's
Okay. Any other comments on this item? Councillor Pert?
Just for reference, Chair, on the Ukrainian position, as of last week, the 23rd of February, and I read from the latest updates, which are really helpful, there's 590 guests in Staffordshire at the moment, and I think that covers 314 groups, which would seem to suggest that the number is about 2 on average, but you know, that information is there. I just wanted to sort of touch on a couple of things. I wanted to associate with Councillor Clement's point about welcoming the report, because the problem with these sorts of reports is you tend to focus on the red bits, as you talked about, are risk-based, and you don't necessarily pick up some of the bits which are going well in the other direction, and you don't tend to have necessarily a balanced argument without picking up some of those areas. And I think we've talked about today some of those areas, delays in discharge. You know, it's a good position against where the rest of the NHS is. You know, the business startups point is a good place to be as well, getting to that national average position. And so I think there is a real danger you don't sort of reflect the sort of two side by side. And actually the graphs and the data, in my view, are really good because it allows a meaningful debate to happen in terms of performance. However, and there is always a however, I just wanted to pick up sort of a couple of small points. One was on paragraph 31, page 19. I still am unconvinced, and it's probably Councillor Clement's area, that the transformation in highways is really delivering against members' priorities, given that existing county council staff still cannot assign jobs on the highway system to meet members' priorities, and instead we have to wait until Amy, the contractor to the county council, decide that they're going to allocate jobs. There are jobs I am waiting years for, and so I don't particularly associate with that comment, and I would urge the cabinet member responsible for this area to actually get some process specialists to walk the processes and actually make sure they do tie up with that comment there, because that is definitely not the case. The second point I'd make on page 31 is just let me go and find the page because that will be helpful. In terms of the dashboard on highways, is broadly, I'm concerned by the bottom graph because it talks about those safety defects identified. It doesn't really talk about the safety defects that have been resolved or the backlogs. It talks about those identified. So if you've reported one 6 years ago and it's still not been resolved, you can't see that in there. Now, I happen to know for a fact that the level of Cat 3s, whilst you say they're low priority, are growing and continue to grow, and they're probably up to 32,000 in backlog. And actually, again, you know, it takes an eternity to get these wretched things resolved. And I wonder whether that graph shouldn't be something else, because it doesn't really tell a full story, because once you report it once, you're not going to keep reporting the same thing. Well, but effectively it doesn't show it. It doesn't show it here. And the final one, just in terms of Councillor Clement's point, in terms of a gigabit broadband, the fundamental problem that we live with today is that we allowed the broadband companies to go for the most populated places first because it gave them the greatest commercial advantage, and that is why we continue to have the rump of 3%. And I would urge the council, with all the powers that it has, to ensure that when we get to 5G or some of these other things that are coming forwards in terms of technology, we go round it the opposite way round so that we don't get left with a rump of people who will always be disadvantaged. Because actually for rural businesses in my area, it is a significant barrier and a significant problem, and I cannot think of a way of resolving it.
Cat 3 goes to Cat 1.
Mr. White?
First, to do with the format of the report. My observation over many years is that the councils that fall flat on their faces are the ones that ignore areas that are, or pretend they don't exist, areas where there are pressures. You see it in a lot of councils when a 114 notice is issued. It is because the Cabinet has ignored an issue, the Scrutiny Committee hasn't bothered with it and all that sort of stuff. So my view has always been, if there is a problem with the delivery of the services, be transparent about it, get it on the table, let's all work together to try and solve the problems. And this committee is an example of us doing that. I was really rather hoping, Mr. Chairman, that I'd managed to dodge the highways bullet on this meeting, but it looks like I've failed. Thank you, Councillor Pert. I owe you a drink at some point that isn't laced with something unpleasant. Certainly the Highways Transformation Programme, I know that Councillor Clements is looking at Highways Transformation through her committee, and it is a point that is close to all our hearts. The pothole situation is something that I'd rather hope that we could start to really make serious improvements with over this 4-year period. First of all, we brought inspectors back in-house. The idea that Amy, the contractor, I'll just refer to it as Amy now, was able to mark its own homework was a nonsense. And so therefore, those inspectors moving back in-house, who I went to visit in Leek, Lederidge depot recently, I think that's working a lot better than it used to be. I think the supervision of the staff needs to improve, the amount of time they spend on patch doing the work. Again, when I went to Lederidge to have a look around there, it's interesting to see how the disconnect between Amy and our staff exists. It's as if the two things are completely separate, and that needs to improve. The flow of information and the scheduling of work needs to improve. The quality of the work needs to improve, and members need to be able to identify an area and get it fixed, because your residents don't care about Category 1, Category 2 and Category 3 potholes. What they care about is the potholes that are in their street, and if it's a pressure point for you as a councillor, you should be able to solve it. Now, I'm told that you can currently do that through your DHP, but I'm not convinced that it's working in the way that it should do. Therefore, that needs to be improved. So there's a number of areas, Councillor Pert, with the Highways programme that I'm looking to see distinct improvements with. Believe you me, if anybody puts the portfolio holder for Highways under pressure, it is me, because my biggest area of challenge is around the potholes. And so I want to see the problem solved, and I want to see them solved right time, first time, right time, whatever time, I don't care what time, just get it fixed and make sure it's done properly. Because those that I've hear cases all the time of potholes being fixed, they pop out 6 months later, it doesn't solve anybody's problem. So through Councillor Clement's committee, they'll be onto that. And I didn't manage to dodge the potholes bullet.
Okay. I don't want to prolong the potholes discussion, but I concur with all the comments that Councillor Pert made. The one thing I would say, which is a constructive comment about the chart that's on page 31 or page 33 of the PDF, which I think Councillor Pert referred to, and I didn't realise this until now. We're talking about the seasonality of winter, but we're only showing 13 months, and I'd suggest we probably need 15 or 16 months to make a full year-on-year comparison worthwhile. Because despite what you've said, that it's not necessarily showing what we'd like it to show, it doesn't really show us the seasonality if you've only shown 13 months. Can I bring in Councillor Yates next?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I wasn't going to mention potholes, to be perfectly honest. But I will make one comment on potholes, which has actually quite surprised me. I mean, on one level, it's positively surprised me, but I think that surprised me. The system seems to depend on people, on individuals like me and residents reporting, not so much on highway inspections going on. I know there are highways inspections going on because things out of the blue seem to get repaired where nobody's complained about them, and we scratch his head on why they've done that over something else. But I must admit, since I've taken over, I've taken it on a mission, basically because of my inbox, to actually record potholes, and I have had a good response as a consequence of them. I'm still disappointed that they step over other ones to get to the ones to repair, but that's another story which I won't go into now. But it does actually shock me that I don't get, oh, we already know about that. I get, oh, that's a surprise, you know, and then they go and fix it. But at least the response is positive, so I'll give them that on what they've done. But that lack, to me, it's a lack of that proactivity to sort of say, he's reported something we know about, this is when we're on with it, etc., etc. So, you know, that's what I'd like to see an improvement on. What I wanted to just pick up on is going back to page 10 and just reiterating the fact that we are in a situation now where the central government is changing the way that BTECs and qualifications for those intermediate years between age 16 and 18 are changing. And I would like to sort of stress and encourage that this organisation does get on board at the earliest possible stage, because they are in the stage where these things are being developed, to actually work with the local colleges, Stafford University and whatever, to actually develop a T-level which isn't based on what the university wants to teach. It's based on what we want to deliver across multiple disciplines. And again, I stress that the T-levels are almost sort of going back to what the apprentices were, where there was a high degree of domination on actual training within the job, and on the job and project work equated to that. So it does give us an actual small window of opportunity to develop those courses in hand, and us as an organisation to actually impose what we want to be embedded within those courses. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Heath.
One short sentence on potholes. When you're looking into Amy, we were told that they were going to do, where there's 6, 7 potholes in a row, there might be 1 cat 2, 2 cat 3, 1 cat 1 or whatever. They come and do the cattery one and they go again. And the week after, they've got to come back, and it's quite a way back to our part of the world to come back to mend the one that was not quite bad enough last time. We were told we were going to do the lot, you know, do the strips. When is this going to happen? Because we have to report a pothole, 1 pothole, don't we? And then there could be 4, so you report 4 times in the same vicinity to make them see it. And it does my head in.
Councillor Clements, do you want to respond?
Yeah, Councillor Heath, that is changing, and for all members, that is changing. The bringing back of the inspectors into house was a positive move. It's having a positive impact. And what will happen now is when you get, like you said, a patch of more than 1, it will be, I can't remember the phrase that Councillor Williams uses, but basically it will be a place repair rather than a one hole and step over 5 others to get there. Councillor Williams had a brilliant phrase for it, but I can't remember what it is now. 1 place, 1 time or something like that. I can't remember what it was. Yeah, just that's... Any issues, speak to Councillor Williams.
Can this Councillor White? Oh, Councillor Pert then?
I promise 1 sentence.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to give the figures that which related to my original point, which is the outstanding Cat 3s. Back in January 21 was 18,900. January 23, 32,600. That's the much more interesting set of figures that I think should be in that chart, because it allows that focus that Councillor White talked about. Thank you.
So a couple of points about the inspectors going out. It might be worth you, Councillor Yates, going to the Ledderidge depot yourself and having a look round. Yep, right, excellent. The inspectors go around driving, they're driving around the place all the time. So they know exactly where the defects are. And when one gets reported, so that's the reason why they get filled, you know, without anybody reporting them on occasions. So they know where the defects are, and they will tend to prioritise those defects that they decide are most serious. The number of Cat 3 potholes we've got is indeed increasing significantly, but don't forget we haven't been able to invest the amount that we wanted to invest in highways, and government took £8.1 million from us a couple of years ago from our repair budget. We filled that in with an additional investment of £15.5 million from our own resources. So this is always going to be a challenge. It's a big strip of road. To your point about skills, Councillor Yates, if I could achieve one thing in terms of devolution, that would be devolving the skills budget and the skills agenda to upper tier local authorities in England. It's madness that central government is, through the skills agency, is the one controlling our skills agenda. We know what we need in this county. It's a huge, diverse area. Some parts, the Moorlands need 1 set of apprentices, Burton-upon-Trent needs a different set of apprentices, and if we could have some control over that with our local colleges, I think we would have a good result for this county, and I think many upper tier local authorities would like to see skills being devolved to upper tier local authorities. And Councillor Clements has answered your question, Councillor Heath.
Spencer, do you want to speak?
Just very quickly, Chair, I think it's the whole place strategy that is what Councillor Williams refers to it as. And just good news, I certainly have highlighted my 2, what I now refer to as iconic sites, the ones that every resident knows about and is repeated time and time again. I had a lengthy conversation with a member for Highways, and most people will be envious now, but my entire road was done last week. Not my road, the iconic site that I highlighted. That's it, yeah. But no, really good, and it does seem, you've got to keep pushing, of course, but it does work.
Okay, just for the minutes, can we check whether the whole space strategy's got a W on it, on the word whole? Didn't go down well. Okay, I think we've reached the end of that item. There's no other indications. Can we therefore go on to item 5, which is the refreshed people strategy, 2023 to 2027. Who's leading off on that?
Not me. Mr. Chairman, if I could introduce Mrs. Getley to the committee. You're familiar with her. She has a presentation for you to get started. This is a pre-decision scrutiny agenda item, Mr. Chairman. So Cabinet has not yet made a decision about this. We are seeking your views, and what we'll do is we'll present the report. We'll present the framework of the people strategy to you. Seek your comments. Should there be no comments, we'll just take it forward to Cabinet. If there are comments, we'll incorporate those into our thinking.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. You've got a copy of the people strategy with your papers, but I've put some slides together just to highlight some key points for you. So the purpose of today, as Alan has said, is to present to you the draft people strategy, which is a refreshed strategy looking for over the next 4 years. An opportunity to reflect on the key achievements of the previous strategy that was brought to this committee prior to it being presented to Cabinet in March 2019. Like the committee, to note the evidence-based approach that we've taken in the development of the refreshed strategy, and ask you to review the We Will commitments against the 4 pillars within the strategy and the proposed year 1 to 2 implementation plan. So our refreshed people strategy, this is included in your packs. That's the front cover of the strategy. If you're familiar with the previous strategy, you'll note that it's sort of got a refreshed look and feel in line with the corporate branding, which is one of the achievements over the past 4 years. Our people strategy mirrors our strategic plan. We've got a really compelling vision for Staffordshire, and we're very ambitious for our communities. This strategy in turn looks at our workforce, and we want to be equally as ambitious for our workforce. You will know that just over 70% of our employees are also residents within Staffordshire. And one of the areas of focus in how we work as a local authority, as a county council, focuses very much on our workforce and the 3 values that were also created through the development of the original people strategy. So just in terms of a little bit of background, we launched post-Cabinet approval mid-March in 2019, our first people strategy for Staffordshire County Council, and that set out at that time what our ambitions and aspirations for our workforce were over the next 4 years. This strategy is a refresh of that original strategy and is looking ahead over the next 4 years based on our learning over the course of the current strategy, but also what we know to be some of our key challenges as a local authority. We've developed the strategy as we did with the original strategy in consultation with our staff, our managers and our leaders across the council. The strategy, as you would expect, takes a planned approach to make sure that we've really got the best workforce, creating the best working environment for people to do their best work. We've organised the strategy against the 4 pillars, which I'll turn to in just a moment. And across those 4 pillars, we've got 23 commitments over the next 4 years, which creates the centre of focus for the strategy and the work that my team will be delivering. The 4 pillars remain. So these pillars were created through the current strategy, and those 4 pillars form the basis of the strategy, and that focuses on attracting and keeping talented people, promoting a positive working environment, developing skills for now and the future, and developing our leaders for now and the future. We feel that those pillars remain current and appropriate and provide a really nice framework within which we can set out commitments across those 4 really important areas. Just reflecting on some of the achievements over the last 4 years, this is a page from the strategy. As it's a refreshed strategy and it's our second one, we thought it was important to reflect and celebrate and recognise all of the great work, not just that my team has delivered, but also the directorates have led. So that includes a whole range of things, and these are just some of the key highlights. That includes our new wellbeing strategy. Through that new strategy, we've introduced financial wellbeing, more recently introduced a salary sacrifice scheme for our staff, sort of recognising some of the key challenges with the cost of living increases. We've created a new employer branding and also invested in a new applicant tracking system that has seen a significant reduction in the time to hire. We've created a new We Welcome induction programme, a separate induction programme for our managers. Clearly, as we all know, over the last 4 years, and certainly couldn't have anticipated when we presented the strategy to this committee and Cabinet, that 12 months later we would be in a global pandemic. So my team, along with every other member of staff, was part of the County Council's initial response and recovery, and so for a period of time we had to put on hold some of the commitments within the strategy whilst we undertook that work. However, that didn't detract from delivery of the strategy overall. Through the course of the strategy, that has been subject to 2 separate internal audits. The first audit concluded that there was an adequate award, I can't think of the right word that audit used, assurance levels, adequate assurance. And then the second audit identified a substantial assurance. So hopefully that gives the committee some confidence that whilst these are highlights, there has been a significant amount of work undertaken over the course of the strategy. As I've mentioned, that isn't just work that my team has delivered. The directors have led the strategy and they're within their own service areas, and there's been some really important positive work that the directors and their leadership teams have also led. The strategy has been developed in a similar way to the original strategy that really sought to secure the engagement and commitment from across the workforce. So we have created opportunities for staff to give us feedback in terms of what they feel is important to them working for the County Council and what will be important to them over the next 4 years. Those things that staff would like us to improve or change to make the County Council an even better employer. We've reflected over the last 4 years in terms of what has been delivered, what some of those key achievements have been, and those areas of work that need further emphasis or embedding have been rolled into the new strategy. Recently, we had the opportunity to pilot the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development's new People Impact tool, and that provides an opportunity to assess the impact of the HR or People Services function, and equally understand from the business what the key business challenges are going to be and how well equipped the People Services team is to respond to those challenges. And we've used the feedback from that tool to also inform the priority areas of focus within the strategy. We've also, as you would expect, used the existing data and insight that we have, our employee demographics, our levels of absence, turnover, our levels of engagement, and there's a whole range of sort of survey data through our employee net promoter score survey and also our SMART survey and other pulse surveys. And we've really interrogated all of that feedback from across the organisation, which in turn has also informed the content of the Refresh People strategy. Turning now to the first year priorities, we are in the process of developing and aim to launch, post-approval of the strategy, some clear statements that set out our cultural aspirations and what we're describing as how we lead and how we work around here. We know that recruitment is increasingly challenging. We're in a fiercely competitive recruitment market. So as you would expect, continuing to improve our recruitment process and promoting our employment offer is a key priority, certainly over the next 12 months, and I anticipate beyond. We will be designing and introducing a new core leadership and management development offer that will cover a whole range of arguably manager essentials, but also will strengthen our leaders' capacity and capability to workforce plan so that they're able to identify talent of the future and ensure succession plans are in place. We'll also be supporting the development of innovation toolkits and an idea submission process, which is something that's been identified as a priority over the next 12 months, to increase people's own responsibility for their own learning and development. So really creating that learning culture where people recognise that their learning and development really is in their hands, and that's something that they're responsible for, as well as giving managers the skills and capability to prevent and, where absence occurs, manage absence and support our staff's well-being. There are a number of key performance indicators that have been identified that we will use to monitor and assess the impact of the work within the strategy. There's a steering group that's been established that will monitor progress of the strategy, and the strategy in terms of the key deliverables will be included in the integrated performance report, which is reported quarterly to Cabinet. Today we would like to seek the views of this committee in relation to the strategy, obviously take any feedback that you would like to share and incorporate that as appropriate into the Cabinet report and review the strategy as appropriate. We plan to present the strategy to pre-Cabinet on the 1st of March and then to Cabinet on the 15th of March. There's a communications and engagement campaign working in collaboration with the communications team that will support the launch and the implementation of the strategy, and we will commence implementation of the Year 1 priorities from April. There will be an annual review of the strategy to make sure that the priorities remain current, and we have an opportunity to refresh the strategy to take on board and reflect anything that's changed. We know that we can't anticipate over the next 4 years all of the challenges that we may face as an organisation, so it's really important that the document is kept live and we continue to review that and make sure that we're focusing on the right areas of priority. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening and happy to take any questions or comments.
Councillor Davis was first, I think.
Excuse my voice. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for the report. I certainly do welcome this report. I took a particular interest in this 4 or 5 years ago, and I can say, reading this report, we've moved on 1,000,000 miles, and I think it's very commendable for things you've done. What I would say is there was a couple of things I didn't quite understand, and this is a parochial thing to me. When I was looking at the director's achievements and ongoing activities, there were a couple in there, and I wasn't quite sure what they were. Perhaps you could explain them to me, please. One was the reverse monitoring, which I don't, again, I have no knowledge about. And the second one was the employee voice groups, which again I was particularly interested in. Could you give me an indication what they, just to my personal information, please?
Thank you. So the reverse mentoring is a scheme that Darrell Ayres introduced in economy, infrastructure and skills, and that provides an opportunity for less senior colleagues to mentor somebody in a senior leadership position. So, for example, I don't know who it is, but Darrell had a member of his team who has been mentoring Darrell, so it's an opportunity for colleagues to feed back to the leaders and managers in the organisation to help them adapt their style and improve their leadership style. And the employee voice groups, there's an employee voice group that's representative of each directorate. So there's one in place for economy, infrastructure and skills, health and care, children and families and corporate services. And that's a group of people that have been invited to come together. They meet periodically and they look at things like the employee net promoter score results and identify through that areas of improvement for that particular directorate that they then feed back and the directors and their leadership teams take on board. So it's an opportunity to create two-way communication with staff that want to take a more active role in creating an even better working environment for colleagues.
Thank you very much for that. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to claim the prize for spotting the typo. Now, I'm sure, from time to time, I'm sure they slip a typo in just to make sure whether or not we're reading the report. And just for the benefit, if I could just mention that it's in the community impact assessment, religion or beliefs. And it's got 33% Christian, 5% other religions. High proportion did not compete this data in my HR personal information. So we did read it. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Next is Councillor Pert.
Thank you. I equally welcome the report. I think it's comprehensive and attractive to read and digest and brings quite a few strands of activity together. We've talked a number of times about the shortage of employees in the marketplace, and this isn't going to change anytime soon. I really sort of welcome the approach to try and be an employer of choice, because when there's a shortage, then we've got to fight even harder to make sure that we've got the best and we can nurture the best. And I think within that, the cultural touchstones that we have within the organisation, particularly the ones which are really clear to people, both those people who are early in their career, but also those people who are looking to come into the organisation, I think is a really important place to be. So I think this is really helpful in setting out clearly what the aspiration is. However, I wonder whether there's sort of a dip sampling, maybe it's your net promoter score, where there's a dip sampling to just ensure that what we aspire to achieve is actually what we're achieving on the ground. And second of all, I noticed that you've got on page 74, and that's a really good diagram on page 74, exit interviews. You know, I wonder whether, you know, those are catching those things to ensure that what we set out to achieve, we're actually achieving from an employee point of view. So that's my first point. Second point is about structural deficits. I think we have to go in our mental thinking to accept that there is going to be structural deficits in certain industries. We were talking about Ed Sykes earlier, or Ed somebody, at least, Ed Stone, earlier. And I think that we really do need to identify those areas really quickly and accept that the industry is not going to resolve every problem we've got. For example, planners, you know, can't find a planner for love nor money. You know, we have a responsibility, in my view, to resolve those long-term structural deficits. And I would like to feel that there was some parallel work going on in the background to identify where those were, and then making sure that we have a long-term plan to fill those gaps. Because if we're not, then in 5 years' time, when we're still complaining we're short of people, then we won't have moved things further forward. And then the final, the next point I was going to make was about the risk to the organisation. Less than 50%, 47% are over 50 years of age. You know, that leaves us with a really significant potential problem if we don't manage this properly. And equally, one of the things we've seen is that massive run to retirement, early retirement, and the work that we could be doing to anticipate what would bring some of those people back into the workplace, or alternatively kept them in the workplace longer. Maybe that flexible working approach might be helpful. And then my last comment is really about page 74 of the pack, which is it's a really lovely slide, but hey, there's a lot of strands of activity there. And which ones are you going to focus in on to be world class at, rather than trying to do all of them okay?
Thank you. Just on a few of those, particularly the structural deficits point, there's a reason why Mrs. Getley talked about innovation, is because the structural deficits is in the long term is not simply going to be solved with more people, it's going to be solved with new ways of doing things. And that's the reason we're encouraging people to step forward with innovative ideas which will boost productivity of each of the employees that we have in the council. To the same token, the succession planning, again, you'll have heard Mrs. Getley say that succession planning is one of our priorities. When I became leader, I looked around the organisation and saw a lot of older people. And without that succession planning, we're going to find ourselves in some difficulty in the next few years, particularly, as you correctly say, people choosing to retire rather than carry on in the workplace. The reason why people have stepped out of the workplace is a whole subject area we could discuss until middle of this afternoon if we wanted to. I don't intend to, or don't propose that we do talk about that at any length, but you are correct that it is an issue and we are contemplating how we deal with that succession planning issue. I think the four key areas where I just wanted to highlight, Mr. Chairman, of the people strategy is innovation. Without new ideas and new ways of doing things, we are just going to be marking time, and I want to see those new ideas coming through. And that also requires the empowerment, which is another key tenet of our people strategy, of middle managers to have confidence to say, actually, somebody's got a new idea. Let's take it forward without the middle manager, who are vital to the operation of this organisation, feeling as if they've had their legs pulled out from underneath them. Succession planning I've talked about is the second area. Being calm when we're solving problems. There is no point us running around like Private Pike shouting, "Don't panic, Captain Mannering." We need to, whenever there's a problem that we're confronted with, we need to deal with it in a calm, rational manner. John. And then the final point is empowering people to make decisions. If we have a confident workforce that can make decisions, then actually the only sin they can commit is not making a decision in the absence of any guidance, because they know what we're trying to achieve overall. People I speak to every month who are new to the organisation at the induction, which Councillor Yates attended recently, I speak to people individually later. One of the reasons why people come to work for Staffordshire County Council is because of the people strategy. That, in part, there are some people who say, well, I've come from a previous council, they have no people strategy, they're not really interested in the people that work there. This is an articulation of how much we value the staff that work for us. And so, therefore, this refresh of it is something that I particularly welcome, because it's an attracting factor for people who might want to choose to work at Staffordshire County Council. Is there any gaps? No. Good.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Pert? No? Councillor Francis?
Just a quick one. I picked up on the point that Jeremy's made about the ageing population and the gender of it as well. 73% female, 27% male. We've got over 70, 2.1%. I assume that's all the county councillors, including him.
It is.
The figures don't adjust the employees, don't include county councillors.
That's down to the electorate, I'm afraid. Councillor Spencer.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I would echo what's been said about the report. I welcome it. It's all very nice and positive, isn't it, as you'd expect. And I take the point that other councils might not have one, and we're already ahead of the game. But he talks a lot about empowerment, self-empowerment. I think there are phrases in there about taking responsibility for your own performance, your own development, and that must be celebrated, of course. And I note here, we talk about a lot in the report how we manage talent. From my experience, sometimes good performing people, talented people, one of the best ways of supporting them is demonstrating that you recognise underperformance and you challenge underperformance. I don't see any reference in the document to that, the hopefully small number of people that we, unless it's implicit within the how we're going to develop our managers and leaders of the future. But I think we have to accept that there is a certain amount of managing underperformance in organisations, isn't there? I didn't see much in the way of reference to that. I just wondered where we were with that.
Sarah?
Thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right. So we talk about performance in the strategy in a positive way, as you would expect. But obviously the opposite of high performance is underperformance. One of the key people policies is our capability policy, and that is one of the policies that has been reviewed and revised during the course of the current people strategy. I think unfortunately, because of a now historic, very sad event, there was relatively low confidence of our managers to actively manage underperformance. So that is a slightly cultural, historic issue. However, through the new policy, setting out very clear expectations and process for managers to follow when they find themselves that they've got a member of staff who isn't performing. As we know, these things are, need to be dealt with sort of swiftly, confidently, and that is also part of the management development offer that we're seeking to improve managers' confidence to some degree, but their capability to manage underperformance where such issues arise.
Mr. Spencer? Okay. Councillor Yates?
Yes, thank you. Just like to reiterate the previous comments. Thank you very much for a very comprehensive and well laid out report. Very good to follow. Very interesting content. One of the things I want to pick up on, it's been touched by a leader, is the succession planning, the importance of that. And I bring back down the comments which previously made about making sure that we are getting the right trainees and involved with the trainees and bring them forward. But within the succession planning as well, and I'm sure we've all experienced this in all organisations, especially looking at the numbers of people between 60 and including over 70, is that, oh my goodness, if we lose X or if anything happened to Y, we would, as an organisation, be a little bit exposed and a little bit in trouble. Within that succession planning is also a degree of indispensability management. And what I mean by that is that certainly in organisations I've worked with, there's always somebody who's got a particular key skill, who perhaps protects his domain and feeds them a little bit and really hasn't got the capability or the want to pass that skill set on. So it's important really to understand the key and core skills and the critical skills of the older people who are subject to that sort of succession planning, to make sure that all those little nooks and crannies and pinch points are absolutely covered. Because I'm sure we've all been in that organisation where if Bob goes, we're okay on X, Y and Z, but he's got an awful lot of historical knowledge on A, B and C, and it's making sure we cover that. So it's getting that documented and it's getting that discussed with those employees in a way which doesn't sort of seem like you're pushing them out and alienating, because what you really want them is to be the ultimate mentor for the people who are coming up.
Councillor White wants to speak?
I'm sure Councillor Atkins is listening to your wise words very carefully.
Just if I can come back on that, I'm sure by virtue I'm sitting here that Councillor Atkins has also taken on board those wise words and is a beacon of how to manage that situation. So,
Councillor Clements.
Yeah, just one quick comment. It's already been raised about 73% of our staff are female and 27% are male. And on the slides we looked at, there was a lot of the awareness slide. We've looked at menopause and getting women back into work after having babies and all that sort of stuff. 27% of our workforce are male, but there was nothing, unless I missed it, about men's mental health. And I think it's really, really important that we recognise that, you know, men coming back from paternity, men do have mental health issues. More men under the age of 45 commit suicide than women. And I think it's a really important issue that we, as a workforce of that many headcount, need to look at how we embrace men and make sure that they're okay and that we give them the courage to speak out, so that they don't feel that they can't come to anybody and say, I've got a problem with, I need help with. And I think that's a really important issue. Thank you, Chair.
For you, Sarah?
Thank you. That's very well made points. I'll take that away and we'll look at our Well-Me strategy to make sure that men's mental health is appropriately featured, and we've got, in the same way that we are for our female colleagues, that we've got that support in for our male colleagues. So thank you.
Can I give a gentle and hopefully constructive comment in terms of the overall structure? You've had some fairly good comments so far, and I'm not trying to be critical, but I have worked in a large organisation before in the drinks industry, and the bigger the organisation, the bigger the reports tend to be, looking at things like strategy, especially about people. And there's about 50 odd pages here, and it goes into great depth, naturally enough to cover a number of different areas. The one thing that's missing for me is the headlines. You know, if you look at an organisation and say, well, that strategy would work, whether it's KPMG, you know, somebody in the chemicals industry or wherever, there's a lot of good sentiments behind the strategy. But I'm wondering whether there needs to be an overlay, and amongst the 50 odd pages, something that's actually pertinent to the priorities of the authority. And as we've been talking today, we talked about educational psychologists shortage, we talked about adult social care, and I know there's a shortage of carers. We've got social workers who've left the authority because of the pay levels being attractive elsewhere. We talked about apprenticeships. Councillor Pert referred to structural defects, age and gender issues. And nothing in the document stands out for me as being, this is Staffordshire County Council's strategy to how these particular issues are going to be addressed. There's a lot there, and you could, I'm sure, go through the various 50 pages and say, well, that refers to that and that refers to that. But I think in terms of a document that the Cabinet should be led by, it should have at least one page which says these are our key objectives. And I did look at the pages 100 and 101 in the report, 102, 103, and they're the KPIs. And it's very difficult to turn from something that's a key objective to a key measure, because there are things there that say managing change work. Well, how do you manage change? How do you change attitudinal behaviours in employees with a measurement? Very difficult to measure that unless you're doing things like regular reviews, regular surveys. And the sort of things that I'd like to see is more of the, and I'm a bit of a sado in terms of figures, but more figures that say, these are the vacancies we've got in this particular area where we're short of people. This is the strategy we're going to have to fill the vacancies. I don't think it's specific enough to the target areas for the authority.
Okay, we'll take a look at that, Chairman, and we'll reflect on the comments that you've made. But the strategy is more of the what document, and sitting underneath it is a load of plans that are the how documents. So we'll take a look and we'll reflect on it for the Cabinet report. Thanks.
Any comments on this report? No, I think we've given a good sounding. Thank you for your contribution. We'll move to item 6, for which we'll need a few other people in the room. It's the electoral review, and we have people in the building who need to be brought in, so it's probably good to have a 5-minute break.
Colin? I've got another meeting downstairs, so I'll be
Okay, welcome back. We're on to item 6, which is the electoral review, stage 2, post the workshops. And is it Councillor White leading?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have with me Mr. Eberly and Miss Marshall, who are going to take you through a presentation. This is a corporate look at the entire county. And I know, Mr. Chairman, that there will be a temptation for people to pick up on their own divisions. But could I suggest through you, Mr. Chairman, that perhaps people resist that temptation? This is about how we reconfigure ourselves for the entire 62, all 8 districts and boroughs, and all the divisions of the county. There will be a presentation, as I say. It has been worked through each of the district and borough areas, and so this is the culmination point of this. This is a pre-decision scrutiny, Mr. Chairman, so it's our opportunity, your opportunity, should I say, to reflect on what we've got so far, and at a corporate level, I've said that now about 3 times, just hoping that we actually do that. Over to Mr. Eberly and Miss Marshall.
Thank you, Leader. Good morning, still morning, members of the Scrutiny Committee. I just wanted to start by really thanking all members, not just members of this committee, but all 62 members for all of their contributions and efforts as taking part in the workshops and their feedback to the review process. As the leaders alluded to, the purpose of today's update and report is to provide members of this Scrutiny Committee with assurance that the process has been followed and that it's allowed for complete member engagement as part of this Boundary Commission review.
Pick a button.
Two different presentations on the go at the same time. So a slide that you can see on the screen now is really giving sort of where the story so far. So when we last came to this committee, Katie and the project team had completed stage 1. You'll recall then that report went to full council in October, where we submitted our proposal to the Commission to retain the 62 members, so hence known as the council size submission. That was approved and accepted by the Commission in January, Katie, I think it was. So we're now at the stage 2. That's where we are drafting out our mapped proposals in terms of electorate figures, and we'll go into that in more detail now. So what is stage 2? It's the redrawing of the boundary lines. And we'll go into the more detail about what the criteria is for this, but the criteria from the Commission is very, very strict. But the real sort of at the heart of it is to have electoral equality across the county, across all divisions. So when Katie and the project team have been working with you in your respective districts and with your district colleagues, we've been looking at the forecast electorate figures for 2025 and onwards ahead of the next county council elections. So very much looking at redrawing lines to ensure that electoral equality is there for all to see. I'm now going to pass to Katie, who's going to go through some of that the criteria in more detail.
Good morning all. So just a bit more detail on the criteria we've been working through with the Boundary Commission. So obviously Chris has already touched on the fact that the main thing we had to really address was the electoral inequality. So our role was about providing a balance across all 3 of the criteria. So firstly, the equality, and then we had to look at the community identity as well. So our proposals will reflect a well-evidenced community identity, and we will be working with the councillors to provide that, and we've already collated quite a bit of that already. Then the next one was about addressing the effective and convenient local government. So it's about making sure that the roles are still doable, essentially, and the boundaries are well represented across the board. So for the member engagement, so we've been working with the members since November. We started the workshops then. Just a quick snippet of all the things we've done really. So we worked with the strategic delivery managers. They've been heavily involved in providing some of that insight in the initial set of proposals. And then following that, there was further iterations of the maps once we'd worked with the members. We worked with the point of contact, so it was a councillor who was elected for the area really, just to represent it, just for a first stab at the mapping really, to make sure that it made sense and it was well reflective of the whole area. Additional workshops were put on, so we've had a total of 17 workshops, 2 per district, It equated to quite a few hours, about 34 hours, I think, across the board, and then an additional one for Stafford, just to make sure that we'd got them as far across the process as we could. So preparing for stage 2, obviously I've touched on this already. Following and reviewing and confirming the data, our initial set of proposals were created, which were taken to the delivery managers to capture that holistic view of the county. We wanted to make sure all of the proposals were well reflected across the whole of the county. Our initial proposals were then taken to the point of contact, chosen by the leader for each district. And then edits were made, as I've said, on the back of these, and there's been several iterations of each mapping for each district and borough. And then this is just a bit of a process map, really, of the process we've gone through to get to here to create our proposals. So obviously taking it through each process, first workshop, several iterations from that point onwards. I won't run through every point here, but it has taken 6 to 8 weeks of 2 to 3 full-time employees to make sure we've got those maps correct, the data is accurate, and all of the forecasting projections reflected well with the electorate and the changes we've proposed to the boundaries on the back of that. And then another one, just how we've continued to develop our proposals. So another thing to factor in, where we've had our discussions with the councillors in the workshops, there has been one-to-one discussions. There's been loads of emails and communication throughout the process. So we'd hope to say on the back of this that councillors feel they have been kept in the loop of the process and what we've done so far. And as I say, I'm still open to having those discussions if anyone has any, questions on things. More than welcome to put time in with myself to update on the process and any further discussions on their divisions. So just a bit of an update on the proposals. So Tamworth, we are proposing, as the Boundary Commission have given us a set criteria to work to, that one councillor is removed from Tamworth. This is due to making sure that the boundaries are well reflected across the board. I know it's a bit of a tricky one to address, really, this one. And then the councillor from that, the resource from that, would be essentially put into East Staffordshire. Because of the vast electorate increase in that area, it means that we would be going from 8 single member divisions in East Staffs to 9. And then for Cannock, some quite nice changes in Cannock, really. It was probably the easiest one, dare I say, that we looked at because of the layout of it. It was quite easy to address the electoral inequality there. So not massive changes there, really. Lichfield was quite a big one, quite a few changes there. We have come to a final decision on all of the proposals, I should mention, as to what mapping changes are being made. So at Lichfield, we've got a couple of changes with the boundaries, but nothing major. And South Staffs, again, quite high variances in the electorate, but no major changes there, really. It's quite a moderate set of changes here. And then finally, Staffs Moorlands, some vast changes here as well due to the layout of the borough, really. Quite a different range in electorate there. So that, again, I'd say probably minor changes for Moorlands. We've kind of tried to do a traffic stop of minor, moderate and major changes. Newcastle, pretty much the same. We worked quite closely with Simon Tagg on this one initially, and then he kind of drove the proposals for Newcastle with some guidance as to what he thought was wise, and they all followed, really, with Newcastle. So I can't take much credit for that one, really, actually. And Stafford, again, quite interesting meetings, got lots of feedback and lots of counter proposals, hence the additional workshop. And we have come to a final set of proposals for this one, really. But Stafford and East Staffs were the ones with the biggest change, I would say, with the highest electorate imbalance. And then again, just a summary of all of the proposals here. One thing I should mention is that where there were double member divisions, we have proposed to put them into single member divisions. So there was one in Cannock and one in South Staffs. And we have all agreed that it would be best going forward to propose single member divisions. The chances of this, they are, we don't really know how this will go down with the Boundary Commission, but we have proposed it.
So thanks, Katie. So that's sort of the summary of sort of the position so far. It's a moving feast. These proposals are being changed on a daily basis. As Katie's already said, we're welcoming feedback from all members, and I know requests have gone out to members for that that local intelligence as to what this means for the electorates across the county. And so we're very much wanting to receive that so it can contribute towards our final submission ahead of council on the 16th of March. In terms of what's next then, so we're working on those proposals. It will come to full council on the 16th of March, hopefully for full approval by the council and by all members ahead of being submitted to the Commission for the deadline of the 20th of March. And then the key dates on the stage. So in terms of our governance sign-off process, taking it to pre-cabinet this week, ahead of cabinet next week, as a council, as I say, on the 16th of March, and the various then. The last bullet point there is the final. If I haven't said this already, then I should have done, which is that this is the Commission's consultation. We are a consultee as the council to that. So that opens it up for any other group or individuals to respond to that consultation in the same way, and that is an option available to all 62 individual members. But we'd very much like to have a response on behalf of the county council, which goes in. So that consultation there takes place between the 27th of June to the 4th of September, where they will welcome feedback on any proposals that have come forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that there are councillors who are not happy with some of the proposals that are being tabled. That's inevitably the case. The last time we did it, as Councillor Heath knows, was 2010, I think, 2010, 2011, and we had the same thing on that occasion. What we tried to achieve as an authority in our submission is a set of proposals that we can, in inverted commas, live with, accepting the fact that some councillors will never ever be happy because they believe that the boundary review should start with their division and work out from there, rather than actually trying to look at the entire county and come up with a set of solutions. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, back to you.
Okay, just to check one detail. Councillor Yates, did you manage to catch one of the workshops?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, you've been part of the process in some way. Okay. Well, I'll lead off in terms of the process, because obviously, and I take it everybody got their opportunity to be part of the workshops during the process. I'll lead off with my take on it. Yes, there are people in the Lichfield area who disagreed with the boundaries, but I think the process was fine, because the opportunity was there for people to look at the numbers and look at the 10% parameters either way and say, well, I don't particularly like that, but it's got to be that way because the numbers make more sense when we do it that way. So I think the process worked. The other thing that you mentioned was the single member ward, and we don't have that situation anywhere in Lichfield to worry about, but I would imagine that would be a big win to get if is the view of the Boundaries Commission that they're prepared to support that. And the other thing that is parochial to Lichfield, and I'm sure it's happened elsewhere, we had some really weird boundaries that weren't coterminous with the district's boundaries. And this has been a fantastic opportunity to tidy that up, because I actually sit on 3 different councils, and it worries me and other colleagues that you have to talk to people, trying to remember which hat you're wearing, because in some respects you can speak to them because you're their representative. In other areas you can't. So this is an opportunity which I know has happened elsewhere, where that has been improved because the coterminosity has been one of the objectives. The other comment I would make is that we had somebody else who was a local expert, and I take my hat off to Katie and colleagues who managed to get local knowledge about presumably 8 parts of the county in the same depth, which was quite impressive. We had Wayne Mortyboys, who was also a quite good local contributor to our meetings, and I presume that happened elsewhere, did it?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, there was SDM for each district and division that we did mapping for, so we had Wayne's equivalent for everyone really, and they were integral in every part of this really. They provided the gaps that we couldn't quite fill, so it's been really useful having them on board with this. And just while I'm on, a key point for me to mention is those councillors that aren't happy with the proposals, I'm aware of 2 or 3, I'm sure there's more. I am offering my support if they do want any help in gathering their counter proposals, as everyone is open to submit their own. I am happy to help with the process of how to do that.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it makes sense, having done all the number crunching, you know, in the case that I could mention in my part of the world, the numbers, you know, you can have all the numbers and it still doesn't make sense to do it any other way. We discussed a solution in our particular area, and as I say, it doesn't make a great deal of sense from a sort of community point of view, but it makes sense when you've got to balance plus or minus 10%. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I thought we got away with the meeting without using the phrase dominoes. It's been a phrase that's been used a lot through this process. So the game of dominoes, that the minute you move one domino, it disrupts the whole sort of chain of other dominoes across the county. And the leader's point, I think, was very useful in that members, I get it, will focus on their own patch, but not probably appreciate the wider knock-on effect. So once we move one line, it then impacts on the next one. So it's not just a case of dealing with that one area to solve it. It then presents another issue in the neighbouring division, ward, whatever. So yeah, dominoes has been probably used far too much, hasn't it, Katie, throughout this? But so I had to get it in.
Support.
Thank you, Chair. I won't rehearse or replay what you've said because I largely agree with everything you said. Just two things, just looking at the detail in terms of out of all the graphs and slides that stood out for me as maybe worth taking on board. One was in relation to Cannock, and I do accept the point which was on Cannock in that there is not huge population growth to necessitate huge boundary change. But maybe you might just want to see the final outcome from the district boundary change and reflect that back in, because if you can make them if you can make some of those boundaries coterminous, that obviously helps, and that may be just something you might want to factor in. And the second one related to the splitting of the Cheslin Hay ward, which is on page 147. It strikes me that you've got division, sorry. It strikes me you've got one division there which is about 4% under, and you've got another division in what you're creating which is about 8% over. And that imbalance, I wondered whether you could do something like moving one of the obvious areas, like Essington, for example. I don't think you could move Great Worley because you couldn't split Great Worley town from Great Worley, sort of the areas outside of that, Great Worley, Landywood. But I did wonder with the M6 going straight through that patch, whether there was a natural boundary there. That was the only thing I saw, and I don't really want an answer. You've no doubt considered it already. You've already discarded it, but I just think those were the only two obvious things.
Does anybody want to respond on that? No? Okay, Councillor Spencer.
Thank you for that. Incidentally, that Cheslin Hay and Essington is in South Staffs, and we had a lengthy discussion with all of the members about the best way of doing that. I'm not going to rehearse that now. I just wonder whether, is there an opportunity to, and do we want to, reflect back to the LGBCE, sometimes that perverse incentives that end up coming out of these sorts of things. And when we look at the criteria, the electoral equality, then community identities and effective local government, in a rural area, and I don't know whether there's a hierarchy of those, but I just wonder whether there should be, and actually talking about community identity and effective local government, because that's what matters to local people, isn't it? I'm sure local people don't know any discrepancy between their areas and another. And if we were to stick with trying to get this plus or minus 10 all the time, I understand it's important, but I wonder whether we ought to make the point that actually what's most important in Staffordshire and other rural areas are, community identities and effective local government. and the perverse incentive I think that it creates, although I wouldn't disagree with the decisions around South Staffs, but we've now created electoral inequality, if you like, in South Staffs, in as much as there's more than 20% difference now between the highest and the lowest. So therefore, if that's important, why aren't we doing something about it? Are we willing to say, actually, what's more important is community identity and effective local government, but just to reflect back to local government the fact that, you know, I'm sure with all best intentions this 10% was introduced, but bear in mind it's 10% for the whole of Staffordshire. Therefore, South Staffs, every area in South Staffs was already negative, so we couldn't achieve parity with the other areas. But what we've actually now done is made a huge 20% difference between the electoral equality. And again, I would emphasise, I think that's the right thing for us to do. I just wonder whether we ought to reflect back that sometimes these things create perverse incentives.
Councillor White.
Thank you. I had lengthy conversations with the chairman and chief executive of the LGBCE on the run-up to this about precisely the points you've just raised, Councillor Spencer. There is an ambition to achieve those objectives that you've set out, but recognising the fact in a very large shire county, rural shire county, it is always going to be difficult to achieve when you're constrained by district and borough boundaries and also the guideline of the percentages. They aren't very dogmatic about the percentages, certainly not as dogmatic as perhaps the Boundary Commission is when they're looking at parliamentary boundaries. They're striving much more forcefully when you're looking at parliamentary boundaries to the numbers than we are. But the diverse nature of some of our divisions, I can speak to my own, which is I've got a huge rural area and then a part of my division which is to all intents and purposes in Tamworth, and it looks like Tamworth Town. So we have to just compromise on issues like that. And many councillors recognise the need to compromise. Some don't, and Miss Marshall will be dealing with those people in due course because she's offered to, in public, which I thought was a rather foolish thing to do, offered to work with those people to try and come up with some form of compromise. So hopefully that helps.
Councillor Yates.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think you're right in what you're saying, but that's always going to happen, I think, when you're stuck to not sort of go outside the borough and district boundaries. I mean, that's the criteria the overall criteria which you've set. Because we have gone outside ward boundaries within the boroughs and the districts, certainly we have in Staffordshire Moorlands, and that's caused a degree of debate because you are squeezing the balloon or stretching the balloon, which you want to say, but ultimately, I think that's going to potentially happen every time we do this with one or two boroughs or districts because of the natural sort of changes in population. And it's that you gain an extra councillor and as a consequence, everybody is undersubscribed, or do you take a council away and then for a short term, everybody's potentially oversubscribed till he can pull that right? Because I was looking at that figures and adding up all the surpluses, is around about 65% of a councillor, so it's which way do you go, isn't it, really? But I mean, if in some cases there's more, say for example, Biddulph where I live, there's more commonality if you needed to pinch, if ever needed to in the future, for Biddulph to encroach in parts of Newcastle and or Newcastle encroach in parts of Biddulph, but that is a dictation which you've decided not to do. For example, Moucop, which has always got an identity crisis because 50% of it's in Cheshire East and, you know, of what's left, 30% is in Newcastle and 20% is in Staffordshire Moorlands. So historically we've had those problems, but if we're sticking within districts, I think collectively and looking at as somebody who's fascinated with maps, in other words, male, I think it's been worked out reasonably well. Very well, I'll change that too.
Okay, I think we're confident with the process, and hopefully it's a good news story that some of us will have to remember in 4 years' time to do the same sort of thing. So. Councillor White.
Could I just pay tribute to Miss Marshall and her team? They have had the patience of Job dealing with some of the councillors and some of the correspondence. It isn't a difficult. It is a very difficult thing to do. And I've got to say that there have been occasions where I've been sort of doing this with some of the comments that are being made, and Miss Marshall and her team have taken these comments and dealt with them even-handedly in a way that would stretch most people, I have to say.
I passed on my comments in terms of the granularity and understanding of local geography. You know, I won't go into specifics, but to know where main roads are and which roads fit with whichever patches. Very, very impressed with the way the team were able to cover that. Okay, we'll close that on item 6. And item 7 is the work programme. There's a few things to mention on the work programme. The Children's Transformation budget, which we have spent some time looking at today, that was originally planned on the work programme as being April. With an officer request due to availability, we've moved that to the May meeting, and hopefully you'll have noticed that the 9th of May is now a full meeting and not a call-in date. It's actually a 2:30 start. I thought members and officers would probably appreciate that, because the bank holiday weekend will be that weekend, so rather than coming straight in for a meeting in the morning of the 9th, it'll be 2:30 in the afternoon. And then the other thing that we need to discuss is the fact that because Councillor Atkins has come off the corporate review, we need to replace her position on the Climate Change Committee, and I believe Councillor Yates is more than willing to be part of that Climate Change Working Group. I did mention it to Councillor Thompson, who's given apologies today, just to say that we need to formally adopt Councillor Yates as a member of that. Went all the way through the meeting and then went back. Councillor Yates to be a member of that Climate Change Working Group. Is that agreeable? Yes. Yep. Are there any other comments on the work programme that we've got in front of us? No, I think we've discussed what we need to in terms of other things. We'll get the transformation programme, and again we look at the governance of outside bodies again later in the next meeting. Okay, if there are no other comments, I'll close the meeting. Thank you.